the land of gods and golden tombs, not even innocence could protect you from the wrath of the state. Ancient Egypt, the cradle of civilization, where towering pyramids touched the heavens and names were etched into eternity, a place where death was not the end, but a passage, where the soul's journey beyond the grave mattered more than anything in this world. But what if that journey could be denied, not by divine judgment, but by human hands? Picture it: a man kneels in the dust, his arms bound tightly behind him. He is surrounded not by an angry mob, but by scribes with reed pens, robed priests murmuring hymns, and soldiers clutching bronze blades. The Nile glistens nearby. The sun is merciless, and the man, he is silent because he knows no defense will save him. His only crime was remembering something forbidden, or perhaps knowing someone he should have forgotten. In this kingdom, justice was sacred, but sacred did not mean fair. Injustice wore the mask of ritual. Execution was not just about death, it was about memory, erasure, spiritual annihilation. Punishment was precise, poetic, and permanent. And the most terrifying part, they believed it was necessary. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, law was not a man-made invention, it was cosmic. At the heart of this belief system stood Maat, the goddess and principle of truth, balance, order, and justice. She governed the stars in the sky, the flow of the Nile, the rise and fall of kings. To violate Maat was to plunge the world into chaos. And so justice wasn't simply a system of rules, it was a divine obligation. The pharaoh was Maat's chosen enforcer. He was not merely a ruler but a living god. His decrees echoed the voice of the divine. Defying him, even in thought, was blasphemy. The weight of justice, therefore, had little to do with fairness and everything to do with preserving order. Unlike Mesopotamia, Egypt had no formal code of laws carved into stone. Justice flowed from royal will, interpreted and enforced by scribes, priests, and officials. Trials were conducted not to find the truth, but to restore harmony. Testimony could be guided by visions, dreams, or divine signs. The process didn't always require evidence, only the suggestion of imbalance. And what of innocence? It meant little if your presence alone disrupted stability. If the gods were angry, someone had to pay. If the crops failed or the floods came late, someone would be chosen to bear the sin, not necessarily the guilty, but the useful. Ritual punishment, then, served dual purposes. It purified society, and it appeased the unseen forces watching from beyond. A man could be executed not for what he did, but for what his death might restore. In this world, pain had meaning, sacrifice preserved harmony, and the execution of an innocent could be seen not as a tragedy, but as a divine necessity. And once you were accused, your fate could be sealed before you ever spoke a word. When the gods demanded justice, the price was often blood. But in ancient Egypt, death alone wasn't always enough. Execution was never just about ending a life, it was about restoring cosmic balance. And to do that, the punishment had to be as symbolic as it was brutal. For those accused of treason, rebellion, or crimes against the divine, the blade came swiftly. Beheading was a common sentence, carried out publicly, with priests present to sanctify the act. In the hush of the watching crowd, the executioner's blow didn't just remove a head, it removed a threat to Maat. But some crimes were considered so vile that death by itself was too merciful. Burning alive was one such fate, reserved for those who desecrated sacred spaces, temple thieves, tomb violators, or those who committed crimes against the gods themselves. Fire, in this context, didn't just destroy the body, it destroyed the soul. It left nothing to embalm, nothing to bury, no vessel for the spirit to continue its journey. And then came dismemberment, a punishment both physical and deeply symbolic. The body, torn apart, reflected the crime of disrupting order. The chaos you caused in life was mirrored in your unholy death. But the worst punishment wasn't of the flesh, it was erasure. To the ancient Egyptians, memory was immortality. As long as your name was spoken, your image preserved, your story remembered, you lived on. To be forgotten was to die a second, far more terrifying death. This second death was reserved for those who posed a lasting threat to power. Their names were scraped from temple walls, their statues smashed, their tombs desecrated. In some cases, they were denied burial altogether. Their bodies were left to rot in the desert, unprotected, unloved, unremembered. No offering spells, no funeral rites, no afterlife. Consider the infamous harem conspiracy, a plot to assassinate Pharaoh Ramesses III, involving nobles, palace officials, and even one of his own sons. The conspirators were captured, tortured, and executed, but for many, the punishment didn't stop there. Their names were erased, their tombs obliterated. They ceased to exist in history. Another example is Seth-Peribsen, a ruler whose association with the god Seth, later viewed as a chaotic deity, led to his memory being defaced centuries after his reign. Though he once held power, his legacy was treated like a disease to be cleansed. Justice in Egypt was not just about the body, it was about the soul. And if you threatened the balance, your punishment was not only to suffer, but to be forgotten. But what if the crime was never proven, or worse, never committed at all? In a world ruled by balance, guilt was not always a matter of fact. Sometimes it was a matter of timing, or politics, or need. In ancient Egypt, you could be executed not because you were guilty, but because your death was useful. The machinery of justice, deeply rooted in divine symbolism, left little room for doubt or delay. When plagues swept through the Nile Delta, when crops failed, or when rebellion stirred in the provinces, the people cried out for order to be restored. And someone, anyone, had to answer for the chaos. This gave rise to the practice of scapegoating, a concept as old as fear itself. When the gods were angry, a human sacrifice could calm the storm, one innocent life to preserve many. Imagine a royal scribe, educated, obedient, loyal, but he carries secrets, whispers from the palace. A failed harvest coincides with rumors of political unrest. A high priest dreams of famine sent by divine wrath. Suddenly, the scribe is called before the court. There is no hard evidence, no confession, but a dream recorded by a priest is enough. The scribe is bound, questioned, and condemned. His punishment is severe not for what he did, but for what the gods might do if he remains alive. His name is recorded not as servant of the crown, but as traitor. His death, a holy necessity. This wasn't rare. Accusations based on omens were accepted, especially in times of crisis. Prophecies, temple visions, and divine warnings took precedence over logic. If a respected oracle claimed a person's aura disturbed the gods, that was enough. But it wasn't just the body that was broken. The mind, too, was a target. Many accused were forced to confess under threat of spiritual annihilation. Not just pain, but the promise of the second death. They were told their names would be wiped clean, their souls lost forever, unless they admitted guilt. These confessions were written on papyrus scrolls, preserved in temple archives, ensuring that the appearance of justice was maintained. The illusion of order was more important than truth, and in a system that saw disruption as the ultimate crime, even innocence could be dangerous. A man too pure might stir jealousy. A woman too wise might spark unrest. Their very presence could shatter the illusion that all was well. In ancient Egypt, order was sacred, and to keep it, even the blameless were sometimes led to the altar. But the cruelty didn't end with death. In fact, for some, it only began afterward. In ancient Egypt, death was not the end of judgment, it was the beginning. Every soul, upon dying, faced the weighing of the heart, a divine trial before Osiris, god of the underworld. The heart was balanced against the feather of Maat. If it was heavier, filled with sin, it was devoured by a demon named Ammit, and the soul was cast into oblivion. But what if the state couldn't wait that long? What if the punishment came after death, not from the gods, but from the living? In Egypt's most chilling legal practice, individuals could be put on trial posthumously. The dead, long buried, their hearts already weighed in the afterlife, were sometimes exhumed, judged again by human hands, and condemned anew. If found guilty in this second trial, their tombs were desecrated, their names struck from monuments, their statues smashed, their memory ripped from history. Without a name, the dead could not be reborn. The book of the dead would not guide them. No prayers would reach them. They became shadows, lost, forgotten, and spiritually annihilated. This punishment was reserved for the worst offenses: heresy, rebellion, or political inconvenience. Take the case of Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh. He dismantled Egypt's traditional polytheism and imposed a monotheistic worship of Aten, the sun disk. He moved the capital, built a new city, and attempted to erase the gods of old. But after his death, the backlash was swift. His successors, including Tutankhamun, condemned him retroactively. His name was scraped off temple walls. His statues were toppled. His tomb was hidden and his memory erased. For decades, it was as if he had never existed. Even more chilling, his family suffered too. His daughters were unrecognized. His wife, Nefertiti, disappeared from the records. The stain of his heresy spread like a curse. This was a tactic of total spiritual warfare. Not only was the guilty condemned, their entire lineage could be punished. Sons, wives, grandchildren. Generational guilt became a legal weapon. The goal was not just justice, but obliteration. The state's message was clear: even death offered no escape from judgment. No matter how grand your tomb, how many spells you recited, if your memory was condemned, you were lost. And in a society that believed immortality was earned through remembrance, this was a fate worse than death. But what if the hand that silenced your name was the hand of your own kin? In a land obsessed with eternity, the deepest wound was not delivered by an enemy, but by blood. Ancient Egypt was a civilization built on loyalty to gods, to rulers, and to family. Tombs were shared, names were preserved through children. Prayers to the dead were passed from father to son. Honor was not only a virtue, it was a duty. But duty could be weaponized. When power shifted, when pharaohs fell or gods were challenged, the courtroom moved into the home. Internal denunciation, the act of accusing one's own kin, became a twisted form of survival. The state rewarded loyalty, even when it came at the price of blood. There are chilling records of sons turning on fathers, of brothers testifying against brothers, all to curry favor with the crown or escape punishment themselves. These betrayals were often incentivized: land, gold, elevation in court ranks, and in some cases, simply the gift of not dying. Wives, too, were drawn into the web. During periods of religious upheaval or temple purges, women were interrogated, manipulated, and sometimes rewarded for betraying their husbands, naming them heretics, spies, or saboteurs. But perhaps the most haunting example of this betrayal lies in the infamous harem conspiracy, a plot to assassinate Pharaoh Ramesses III. The conspiracy was vast, involving dozens of courtiers, guards, scribes, and members of the royal family. One of Ramesses' own sons was implicated in the plot, working alongside his mother to secure the throne. When the conspiracy failed, the punishments were brutal. Bodies were broken, names erased, but the betrayal within the royal tombs left deeper scars than any execution. Families were collectively disgraced. Even those not directly involved were stripped of status. Tombs were sealed in silence. Lineages were buried not in stone, but in shame. Symbolically, betrayal was the worst sin, a violation of both earthly and spiritual law. It shattered the sacred bond meant to preserve memory beyond death. To betray one's kin was to condemn both your family's legacy and your own soul. And yet, in a system where silence meant suspicion, many saw betrayal as the only path to survival. Because in Egypt, the afterlife might last forever, but the living could still end it early. And when the tombs finally closed, what stories did they seal inside? Ancient Egypt is remembered for its splendor: golden sarcophagi, towering temples, gods carved into eternity. But beneath the brilliance lay a darker truth. Justice was not always blind, and it was never safe. In this world, law was a tool of cosmic balance, but also one of fear. The line between piety and paranoia blurred easily. One moment, a man might be honored with incense and prayer; the next, his name chiseled off stone and cast into oblivion. The terrifying paradox. This system was built not by monsters, but by believers. By scribes, priests, sons, and wives, all convinced that punishment, even of the innocent, preserved the sacred. They feared chaos more than cruelty, so they crushed the disobedient, silenced the different, and sometimes executed the blameless, not for what they did, but for what they represented. And in doing so, they carved a question into history. If your survival depends not on your actions, but on your usefulness to power, can you ever be truly innocent? A name carved in stone, scratched away by trembling hands, buried beneath a sunlit desert. Forgotten not by time, but by design. Which punishment do you think was worse, the physical death or the erasure of the soul?